Hey everybody, it's Tori from Praying Hands and Walking Feet. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're joining us. Today we're going to dive into a topic that I don't think is discussed very often. What do we do when our older child, not necessarily a teenager, but older than maybe say 5, is having tantrums, is still having tantrums? How do we handle that? Shouldn't they have learned by now, like how to handle their emotions and things like that? How do we as the parent not just like snap and be like, come on, you're 10 years old now, what is the deal? But sometimes our kids just, they can't. They don't have the skills, they're not equipped, their brain doesn't work that way. And so what can we do in that moment? And now it doesn't mean that somebody has a diagnosis just if they are still having tantrums at an older age. I am by no means a professional who can diagnose anything, but if your child is still having tantrums when they are older, how do you as the parent handle that? How can we help our kids through this? And what we have found, we had an incident the other day where it ended up being the perfect storm. And I'll dive more into why I think it was the perfect storm as we go along. But in the moment, what had to happen was, instead of me focusing on my child's behavior and what was happening and how overwhelming it was and how overstimulating it was for me and how triggering it was I just had to stop and go, okay, my child is not giving me a hard time. This is not on purpose. They are not trying to be manipulative. They are not just lashing out to be mad and angry. Like, my kid is struggling right now. And that right there, that thought is what I needed to be able to shift my anger, because I was mad. It was almost bedtime. Like, we had staved off little things throughout the day, and now it was just blowing up. And so I was frustrated because we had worked through the things in the day, like we had been positive, we had done all the things, and now it was still blowing up. So my initial gut reaction was to be frustrated and angry that all those steps that we took during the day didn't work. And so that was me feeling like a failure. I don't know if you've ever felt that way as a parent. I'm willing to bet yes, because most of us do, and that's completely normal. And I needed to get myself out of the picture so that I could help my kid. And so I was able to then shift into, okay, my kid's having a hard time, and I'm the parent, I'm the one who gets to help with this. And this particular child, I know a lot of how they feel. We think about things the same way. We internalize things the same way. We're emotional the same way. We're angry the same way. We're not exactly the same, but we have a lot of similarities. So I kind of already had a knowing of how they were feeling inside, because I remember feeling that way. And so I was able to step into the role of, what would I have wanted or needed if this child was me? I was able to look at that child as me at that age, struggling with something, not knowing how to do it, being frustrated because it was even happening, and I knew how it was impacting the rest of the family. And so what would I have wanted or needed from a parent at that moment? And I'm telling you, oh my goodness, just having that thought change is what allowed me to then, do the bear hug, and to then just rock back and forth, and to then just listen and be understanding and not try to snap them out of it. Because I know we as parents, we don't want to listen to it. We really want there to just be a switch that we can just flip and the tantrum is over and we can move on with our day. Because in our eyes, this is a tiny, small, minuscule thing. But in our child's eyes, it is a huge, massive thing. And so they can't just snap out of it. And so by shifting my mindset, I was able to just sit and be, and allow the feelings to get out, and allow the anger to get out, and allow the yelling to happen, and not take it personally. Because my child was not yelling at me. My child was yelling because they had all the feelings and all the things inside that just they needed to get out, and they didn't know a healthy way to get them out yet, or they were unable to access those tools, because we teach our kids those tools. But just because you have the tools doesn't mean you always know which toolbox to reach into in the moment. So we were able to, through rocking, I even shushed like you do a baby, when a baby's having a tantrum, and you hug them close to you so that their heart is with your heart, so that you can help co-regulate. And then I swayed, like they teach you to do with a baby, and I rocked back and forth like you do with a baby, and I shushed, and I stroked their back, and I rubbed their head. All of those things that are soothing and comforting to babies still work when they're a little older. And so we were able to come around, and then just to solidify that connection and to make sure like my child knew I was there, that I was with them, and that we were both co-regulated and we were good, I removed them from the room that we were in, and we went into my room and laid down in my bed, and we read a story, just a chapter, and that was it, just to solidify that connection, just to, okay, we just went through all of that. That was a lot of energy expended, and now we just need to sit. And so after the story, my child was like, okay, I'm ready to go out to play. Like totally over it, co-regulated, back down, normal, all of that, because I had given my child the opportunity to get those feelings out. Now, I do want to put a caveat in here. I do not let my children hit me. That is not an acceptable way to get your feelings out. I will not allow my children to yell mean things at me. But if they need to just scream, or if they need to rah and be crazy for a minute, sometimes we need that physical release. And so that is something that I do allow. But you do need to have boundaries in place, because it is absolutely not okay for you to become your child's punching bag. So I do want to put that in there so that we know that there are boundaries there. Okay, so my husband and I got together and we talked about the tantrum. We talked about what happened, and we were able to uncover some triggers. So then we could help, not prevent, but so that we could help avoid the situation completely in the future, or so that we could be prepared. And so sometimes it's helpful to get together with someone who wasn't in the moment handling the tantrum, or to sit back a little while later, a couple hours later, maybe the next day later, when you're not so emotionally invested in it, and look at what happened from an outsider's perspective. Okay, how did we get here? What foods were eaten that day? How much energy was expended that day? Were we excited or overstimulated? Were we tired, hungry, little dehydrated? All of those things. Was the child worried about something? All of those are factors into behavior. And so what we found was the tantrum that we experienced the other day was a perfect storm of a little bit of anxiety, something that we know makes that child anxious, was about to happen. Dehydrated, because we had a couple of trips and outdoor days that were fully outdoors with a lot of sweating, and we were kind of thinking this child might be a little dehydrated. Hunger, because when you're dehydrated, you really don't want to eat, so the bare minimum eating had been happening. Overstimulated, we had friends over with lots of kids, and it was all just a perfect storm, all of those things. And so my husband and I looked at each of those things. Okay, the dehydration, we can help control. That's part of our job as parents, to make sure that our children drink enough water throughout the day. So that's something we got to take responsibility for and make a plan of action for. The hunger, the eating, again, another thing we get to take responsibility for. Okay, it's time to eat. Okay, here's a snack. Okay, all of that, to make sure that we're feeding them enough for the energy they're expending. The excitement and the anxiety, really, sometimes you can help with that and sometimes you can't. So preparing for things that you know that they're anxious about, maybe talking about it, sometimes that goes one way or the other. But doing what you can to help with that, but that might be one of those things that we don't really have any control over and we just get to deal with. The overstimulated and having all the people over, we don't want to not do those things, and it's not so bad that we don't have to avoid having friends and kids over, but it was a late night. And so we had talked about, okay, well, maybe we put a cap on it, like we know after this time, the next day is just going to be going downhill, or things like that. And the food, we talked about like, oh, we had a ton of sugary foods, which we don't eliminate sugar, but we try to keep it in a reasonable amount. And food dyes, we had started delving into, were food dyes triggers and things like that. And that's a whole can of worms I'm not willing to unpack right now. But so we had decided that we were just going to be more aware on when all of those triggers were happening. So if we allowed treats with friends over and things like that, and it was a late night, then he and I would just be prepared the next day to spend a little bit more time connecting, filling that bucket, and all of that, having a little bit more patience, understanding that those choices that we made the day before are going to have consequences or effects on today. And so that, I'm hoping and praying, that will help us in the future just to be more aware, because now we know, okay, these are some triggers. Okay, this is what it looks like when we ignore these triggers and allow a perfect storm to happen. So my husband and I took responsibility for our parts in it, and we're just gonna go from there with being more aware and paying attention, because that will help us have patience and to be able to handle situations and tantrums like this that might come up in the future, because we will be able to know, okay, this is a short-term thing, and this was because A, B, C, D, all of that. And when your mind can kind of come up with a plan or a solution, it's so much easier. The reason that we get bogged down and emotional and we start to have a parent tantrum is because we don't have a plan, and we don't know why, and we don't have an answer, and this is all unknown, and so then our anxiety spikes or we are triggered. But when you have a plan, you know what happened, you know what the result could be, and if this does happen, you know you're going to do A, B, C, and D. That helps our brain calm down, just like a child's. When we have a plan, when we know what to do, when we know what's coming, when we know the why or the how to handle it, we can relax, and it doesn't take as much emotional energy. So I hope that tip helped, so that in the future you can, if you have a hard moment like we did, you can step back and do that little reflection. It was literally a 5 or 10 minute conversation with my husband and I, just talking it out. Okay, what could have been the causes? Okay, are we willing to cut that out completely so that we avoid this situation in the future? Or how can we like work with it and still live our life knowing that this might happen again, and how would we handle it if it does? So please, in the comments below, please let me know if you have a child who is older, should be out of those tantrum stages. How do you handle it? What strategies do you have? Or, you know, if this was helpful to you because you're the type of mom who doesn't know, or dad who doesn't know and has just been like, okay, go to your room until you figure it out. I'm not mad at you, but you got to get over this. If that's you and this is helpful, please, I'd love to hear from you. So make sure you click subscribe and like below so that you can see all of our videos coming up. Thanks for stopping by.